Sometimes I forget that you've gone. You've gone and you're not coming back. And it's hard to believe you're still not here. What's left behind disputes that fact. Your closet's still full of your clothes and your shoes. And your bookcase still holds all your books. It's as if all you done was to go out of town. You'll be back soon, that's just how it looks. But your suitcase is empty. It's right here in the hall. That's not even the strangest thing. Why would you leave your wallet behind? Your glasses, your wristwatch and ring. Your glasses, your wristwatch and ring. Sometimes I forget that you're gone, and that we'll never see you again. I think for a moment I gotta give him a call. But I can't now, I realize that meet for lunch at the usual place. The place where we always would go. And there was something I wanted to tell you so bad. Something I knew that you'd want to know. Go by myself to our old home. But that seems such a strange thing to do. The waiters would wonder what was going on. Why weren't you there? Where were you? Why weren't you there? Where were you? Sometimes I forget that you've gone. I remember and I feel the ache. How could it have happened? How could it be? It's not true, there must be some mistake. Mementos and memories, tell me what good are they? No, they're not much to have in the home. It's true that you've gone and you're not coming back. And this world seems so empty and cold. But sometimes something happens, it doesn't seem strange. You're not far away, you're near. Sometimes I forget that you have gone. Sometimes it feels like you're right here. Right now it feels like you're right here.
Hello, I'm John Schuderer. I've been asked to talk to you about grief, about my journey through my grief crucible. And I'm going to share some information about grief with you, and I hope you find it interesting, both interesting and helpful. So 1999, my youngest son Noel decided he wanted to see the world. He went off to Israel with his girlfriend. She had family there that they stayed with on a kibbutz. They had a great time visiting the area. They saw Egypt and Syria. And at some point, they decided to go up to Thailand, Koh Tao Island in Thailand, where Noel decided he was going to become a scuba diver instructor. He took his certification classes. He wound up getting certified and just loved doing that work and living on Koh Tao Island. At some point, he broke up with his girlfriend and moved off to Taiwan, where he started teaching English to young elementary Taiwanese students. He was able to earn enough money to maintain his life over there. And at some point, he just informed me that he was coming home, which he did. This was in May of 2001. When he got back, he wasn't looking very good. So we asked him about that, and he said that he had been diagnosed with something called Behçet's disorder. Behçet's disorder is kind of a syndrome. It's got lots of different symptoms, lesions on the skin, nerve problems, itchy skin, all kinds of different things. But taken to the extreme, it could turn quite bad. So we suggested that he go see a doctor, and he said, no, I just need some R&R before I return back to Taiwan. So while he was home, I'll come back to that later. One night around May 3rd, let me go there. While he was at home, we spent some time looking at a lot of photographs. He was telling me stories, just loved that time, loved the time catching up, very meaningful. He was also visiting lots of his friends that he hadn't seen in a couple of years, and that was just to be expected. We figured he hadn't seen them for a long time. He wanted to catch up with them as well. So one night, May 3rd, I came home late from work. The lights were on in the guest room where he was staying, and I knocked on the door, and there was no answer. So I opened the door, and I figured he had his headphones on, so I opened the door, and I could see that Noel did not look good at all. He was quite ashen. So I went in, took a closer look, and I could tell that he was not well. I called 911 in a panic. They had me check his pulse, of which there was none. And because of his coloring, it had appeared that he had died sometime earlier that day. A blessing in that story is that the night before, when I went to bed, Noel had gone into the bathroom, and I went into my bedroom, and as I was going by the bathroom, I just knocked on the door and said, "Good night, Noel, I love you, son." So those were my last words to Noel. that is part one of my story. So I want to talk to you a little bit about transformation. The title of my talk is Transformation in the Crucible of Grief. And transformation, as we're all familiar with the transformation that a caterpillar takes into becoming a butterfly. It is a complete metamorphosis of what was the caterpillar into the butterfly. It's so dramatic, and everything is different when the butterfly emerges from once before it went into the cocoon. A crucible, some of you may remember this from high school days, is a little something that you put elements into, you heat it, and things change. But it's also, I like the second definition that you see here, a situation of severe trial or in which different elements interact, leading to the creation of something new. We're going to take a look at how grief is like a crucible, where different things go into grief and we come out transformed on the other end. So just so you know, grief is normal and natural emotional physical reactions to loss. It's not pathological. That means it's not an illness. It's not something wrong with you. It's not a personality disorder. It is a natural part of what happens when we have a loss. It often involves lots of different emotions when something that's familiar to us changes. A person is gone, we lose a job, so on and so forth. Conflicting feelings in the simplest terms are sadness on the one hand and relief on the other, and may include some guilt, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So grief is always tied to loss, always connected somehow. There's a loss that occurs of some sort that causes our grief to be enacted, if you will. In fact, loss is a fact or process of losing someone or something of value. So let's take a look at some different types of loss. There's micro loss, there's major loss. Micro means small, so there's two different kinds of losses. And in this time of 2020, where we are dealing with a pandemic, there's lots of micro losses, and there may also be some rather major losses as well. This is a list from, let me look forward here, the Holmes Rahe Life Stress Inventory. I've seen this before, and the things that are listed on here, you can take a look, are things that are in order of how much stress they produce, or how much grief, perhaps we could say as well. So death of a spouse, death of a loved one, divorce. You can look at the list here, being fired at work. Now, some of these things you may look at and say, well, why would they cause grief? Let's take pregnancy, for example. Pregnancy means it could be, there's lots of happiness, perhaps, if it's a wanted pregnancy. Maybe you've been looking to become pregnant for a long time. The other aspect of why it might be grief is the pregnancy may get terminated before the baby is born, or other things come up in the pregnancy. And some of these other things on this list, let me flip to the second page here, you can see as well. Changes in residence, changes in a job. There are things that are always changing in most of these instances here. So they can all be sources of grief, and they can also be sources of joy. And sometimes those things go along together, don't they? An example that I use for myself is I love camping in the mountains of Arizona. And when I spend a lot of time up there, let's say 3, 4, 5 days, it's kind of sad to leave to go back to the city life. So there's both joy in going to the mountains, joy while I'm there, and then some sadness in leaving. So it's a transition. So this is a diagram, one of many that are out there, called the stages of grief. And as you can see, kind of a horseshoe shape in it. Usually in a major loss, There's shock, numbness. We don't believe it. That's the denial piece. Emotional outbursts may occur, and so on and so forth. But this diagram makes it look like it's just a progression from one thing to the next. And really what's going on is this. I think this is much more realistic, the way it works. I was trying to fill this up, complete this, or draw it out on my own thoughts, my own reactions to the death of my son. So it bounces all over the place. It's not a progression. It's not a linear progression from one stage to the other. Some of you may have heard of Elizabeth Kubler's raw stages of death, or stages of grief. There's 5, as I recall, and they're usually presented in a linear form, but here again, they are not linear. Our emotions, our reactions are bouncing all over the place, and over time, hopefully, we get to this top stage here that we see of loss adjustment. I want to talk about anger for a minute. Anger is something that I call an umbrella emotion. If we dig down, and anger is one of the ways men typically process or handle their grief. Most of the other emotions are not encouraged in us as young boys. For example, crying. We're told big boys don't cry, right? So often we go to anger. But what's underneath anger, if we dig a little deeper, are some of these other emotions that we see here. Sadness, hurt, frustration. I know when I get frustrated, I get angry. Sometimes a few choice words start flying around, that sort of thing. But look at some of the other emotions too that anger. I think one of the big things, and maybe some of these other things fall into this category of unmet expectations. We expect something to go one way, and it doesn't, so we get angry about it. And often, really what's at the root of unmet expectations is hurt. We're disappointed. So I encourage men always to take a look at your anger. What's going on underneath the anger? What's a deeper emotion, perhaps, that you're not willing to take a look at or not able to see? Sometimes our family and friends can tell us what those are if we ask. Now, here are 3 feelings or emotions that are very important that sometimes come up in a grief or in a loss situation. We feel helpless, we feel hopeless, or we feel worthless, or maybe all 3 together. These are very key, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. This is a wonderful little poem that I discovered a couple of years ago, and there's a recording by David Whyte of him reciting the Well of Grief that I want to play for you, and then we'll talk about this a little bit.
Those who will not slip beneath the still surface on the Well of Grief, turning down, turning down, turning down through its black water to the place we cannot breathe, we cannot breathe, we cannot breathe. We'll never know the source from which we drink. We'll never know the source from which we drink, the secret water, the secret water, the secret water, cold and clear, the secret water, cold and clear. I'll find in the darkness glimmering the small round coins, the small round coins, the small round coins thrown by those who wished for something else, thrown by those who wished for something else. The Well of Grief, the Well of Grief, the Well of Grief.
I love this little poem. I think it says a lot about processing grief. And Typically, men are afraid of grief, or we tend to turn away from it. It's not something that we're comfortable with. I'm not sure anyone is really comfortable with it, but men, for some reason, many men typically do not do grief well at all. So this poem to me is doing a couple things. One, it's encouraging us to go into our grief, turning down to its black water. If we don't slip into beneath the still surface in the well of grief, we never know the source from which we drink. And what I think what he's talking about there is a deeper source. Once we process grief, we see our lives differently. We see our relationships differently. And the small round coins that are thrown in by those who wish for something else, those are little, I think they're just little gifts that we get once we go through our grief and process it and really take a look at it. So the new source and the new gifts that we receive are tied together here. So another concept of coping with grief is to know that everyone grieves in their own way at their own pace. And many times people who are grieving are told that you need to do it this way, or you need to do that, or you need to take care of something, or and often lots of times things are said that come across as really lame. They seem stupid. They might be insulting. They might even be hurtful. So we have to be patient with others who don't understand what we're going through. Things like, oh, they're in a better place, or are you still grieving after all this time? Certain things that they say, we just need to understand that people often, and think of yourself, often we don't know what to say. So, and at our own pace, that's critical. In my situation, it took me about 2 years after Noel's death before I started feeling what I would consider normal again. Remember that crazy diagram that we had with the red lines bouncing back and forth? I sure went through, experienced that, different emotions, so on and so forth. So this is a little video of a clip from 7 years ago, 2013. This was after there were 19 firefighters here in Arizona that died in a blaze that they were fighting. And there was a huge memorial service in our local convention center here. And Vice President Biden at the time came to talk to those that were present. And I'm going to be sharing 2 clips of him through this presentation. This first one explains a little bit what the grief feels like when we're hit with it. And we're talking about the major losses here. So let me go ahead and play this.
From the time they breached the door, you lived in fear of that dreaded phone call, fearing the worst. And when it came, the pain and the loss were more profound than you ever imagined. I know. I remember getting that call. The feeling of being sucked into a giant void in your chest. The attempt to suspend reality, the sense of slow motion. But my God, this can't be true.
My God, this can't be true. Some of you have had that thought, that feeling, that emotion. And it's gut-wrenching. Like you said, it's like sucking the air out of your chest. It's just overwhelming. Noel's death was beyond comprehension to me. All of a sudden, life was turned upside down. That's kind of an understatement. What I do remember is that time, all of a sudden, time took a different form. It felt like the world was going at super speed, and I was just plodding along at slow speed. And I wanted to yell at the world and say, don't you know what's just happened? How can you continue with what you're doing and not stop and slow down? So how does grief feel to you? I hope you'll consider that thought. So let's take a look at the crucible of grief. What's in your crucible of grief? There are some things that automatically pop up or fall into the crucible for us when there's a loss or a major loss. And first is chaos. I was just talking about that chaos for me, what that was like. And some things that factor into how we process our grief. One of them is like expectedness. Was this death expected? If it was, then it may not be such a shock because we've had time to somewhat mentally and emotionally prepare for it. If it's unexpected, as in Noel's death, it's that much more. We don't have the time to prepare for it, and the impact, at least to me, was pretty, I don't even know what the word is. So naturalness, this is another one. Naturalness was it a natural death? Was it a person of old age or someone dying of a terminal illness? In Noel's case, we knew he had this Behçet's disorder. Kind of, in my mind, initially thought that might have been what happened, because he didn't look good when he came home. He told us about this diagnosis. And so, but it really didn't take any of the edge off, primarily because of the chaos. It was just unexpected. I think the unexpectedness overrode the naturalness, what little bit we thought there might have been. The ambivalence, what this means is what's your relationship like with this person? Were there a lot of strong feelings, either strong loving feelings or maybe feelings of hatred or anger towards this person? Those feelings kind of bounce back and forth. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. Now, dependency plays another role in our crucible. One of the ingredients in there. And what that is was the person that you've lost, were you dependent on them for something? Maybe financial support or emotional support. What was that connection like for you? Dependency and how strong that dependency is plays another role in our grief. Our age and maturity level, I think, plays a big role too. I didn't mention this earlier in my story, but when I was 8 years old, my father passed away from an infection following an accident that he had. At age 8, I don't think I really had any idea what that meant. His job had kept him away from home quite a bit anyway. I only saw him periodically, as best I can remember. And there was not a strong emotional connection with my father. So, and I think the age had a lot to do with the maturity level. Obviously, when Noel died, I was a lot older, a lot more mature, to understand things a lot better. And then all the emotions that fall into our crucible when there's a major loss. And we don't all experience the same emotions. Some people have maybe more anger, some people have more sadness, a mixture of some. The amounts are different as well. So many emotions come up if we allow them to. What I remember best in my recovery process was that I made a promise to myself, having been in the mental health field, I made a promise to myself to feel all of the emotions that came up as best and in as healthy ways as possible, rather than trying to shove them down. So in our crucible, we have, by choice. Now, these are some things that we can put into our crucible. We often do. So let's run through those a little bit. We may fall back on or away from our spirituality or our religion. We may be more dependent on it, or we may be angry at God and throw that out the window. The next one is support and help of others. Who is your support crew? And family, friends, maybe spiritual people, religious leaders. It may also be to reach out for professional help as well, or to reject any of that. Sometimes we just don't want to deal with people, so we push everyone away. Ritual, we may fall into some rituals. Maybe it's prayer, maybe it's taking a walk every day, maybe it's something that you've created on your own, or we fall away from some rituals that we may have been using prior to the loss. Routine. Routine is typically a good thing to keep as best as possible. Sometimes that just falls apart as well. And probably over time, we will start getting back to that routine. Submission. This is similar to the first step of the 12 steps for some of our 12-step programs. But it's an admission that this is bigger than me, that I'm out, this is beyond my control, and to allow the loss to come in. And if you remember that wacky chart that I showed you, one of the items on there was, oh gosh, now my brain just went blank. Acceptance. That's the word I'm looking for, is acceptance. We just have to get to a point after the denial and the shock. At some point we have to say, this has happened. I don't like it, but I have to admit that it's happened and it is real. Disorder, reorder. This is maybe talking to our routines, to our lives, everything that's going on. Richard Rohr talks about order, disorder, and reorder. Order is our general day-to-day lives. Disorder is something is thrown in to throw us off kilter, something we have to readjust to, and that's the third phase of reordering. That's kind of the process that I think grief takes us through. We can choose to find ourselves a safe environment. Again, going back to everyone does this on their own time in their own way. So you find what's safe for you. It may be with family and friends. It may be outdoors. Who knows? Now, sometimes people will turn to alcohol or drugs or increase their use of alcohol and drugs. This is usually not healthy, not helpful. It takes away the emotions, those strong emotions, yes, but in the long run, it's doing physical and emotional, spiritual harm to yourself. So it's best, if possible, to stay away from those, if at all possible. We often also fall into isolation. We don't want anyone around us. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to deal with it. So we isolate. We stop doing the things that we love to do all along, that sort of thing. And sometimes that can take us to a place of considering or acting upon suicide. So an important piece right there is that just because you have thoughts of suicide, many people do, but they never act on it. So if you're having those thoughts, we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then another thing we can put into our crucible is to just take some kind of an action, do something when you're able to help you process your grief. Whether it's making a phone call, reaching out, asking for help, do something. Action always helps. So a couple of comments about our grief crucible, just so you know that you're largely in control of what goes in and out of your crucible. And what I've discovered is that for me, over time, the contents, what I put in there, and the amounts of how much and what I take out changes over time as I move through my grief. It might be initially I need a lot of ritual, but over time, maybe not enough, or I don't need as much ritual anymore. and I moved to more physical activity, perhaps after getting some physical exercise. So the Crucible, it's a process. It takes time. That's what's so important, and to know, it's important to know, and also to take your own time. Let's see. Part 2. This part of the story is after Noel's death. We had a fantastic, wonderful, moving, uplifting celebration of life for Noel. We did it outdoors in a park in Phoenix, Arizona, in the evening at sunset, and then the full moon came up. It was just a wonderful celebration of his life. Lots of people took time to tell stories. We laughed, we cried, we hugged. It was just fantastic. So because Noel died at home, he had to undergo an autopsy. He was not under a doctor's care because there was no cause of death, and he had to undergo an autopsy at that time. So after the autopsy, we waited and waited. It seemed like forever, but it was really only a couple of months. And we finally got this letter from the medical examiner's office about Noel's examination. And you may not be able to see it there, so let me expand this. But this was a second kick in the gut right here, and that's the highlighted part. It's my opinion that the cause of death is diphenhydramine intoxication. Further, it's my opinion that the manner of death is suicide. This was another huge kick in the gut. Just with whatever minimal healing we have been able to achieve on our own between May and July 20th, was just totally knocked to the floor again. And we felt like we were in the basement now. Suicide. We just could not believe this. And just so you know, diphenhydramine is like an antihistamine. It's a common ingredient in things like NyQuil, and some of the other cold medicines. That's what makes you sleepy. So suicide. How could we ever suspect that it was suicide? We never saw that coming. But remember, I said I was a mental health professional, and I never saw this coming. So because he didn't leave any suicide note, we don't really understand what happened. We had, I should say, I had to put pieces together, fill in the question marks as best I could from what little information I had. And so suicide, let's take a look at some contributing factors that may have gone into Noel's decision to end his life by suicide. My middle son was probably the most depressive of the three. We never suspected anything of Noel or the older son, Jason, but the middle son, Ryan, did express some outward depressive behaviors in late elementary school and into high school. Noel had an uncle on his mother's side of the family who did attempt suicide and then later completed after a second attempt. Now, this was about the time Noel was 8, 9, 10 years old maybe, and I remember being so angry at his uncle that he really said, "This is an answer to your problems." He didn't say that literally or verbally, but just by the act itself. That was the message I thought was conveyed. There's alcoholism on my side of the family, not myself, but there are members in my family that I feel have some alcoholic tendencies, if not full-blown alcoholism. A great aunt, my aunt had anxiety and alcoholism, and there were mental health issues suspected in those mother's family, right? His mother's mother, his grandmother's family. Yes. So the other thing we've been able to piece together as well, Noel was away for 2 years. First, he's away from home in foreign countries, so that's stressful. He loved it, but I can imagine it's stressful, maybe not knowing the language or the customs. While he was gone, his grandparents died on his mother's side. He was not able to come back and say goodbye or go to the funeral services. Like I said, he broke up with his first girlfriend. Then at some point, there were also relationship challenges with the second girlfriend off and on. And his second girlfriend became pregnant while they were there in Taiwan. And then she has a miscarriage. So remember, there's that pregnancy thing. I don't know, because Noel never expressed it to me whether or not he was excited about the pregnancy or not. Then his girlfriend has a miscarriage. There's all kinds of emotional things attached to that and physical things as well. While he was home after he came back, we found out this later, probably at the memorial service or later, that he was giving his belongings away to his friends. This is one of the known warning signs of potential suicide. And like I said, he had also been diagnosed with Behçet's disorder, which he loved his body in terms of being physical all the time. He was always active outdoors, rock climbing, hiking, biking, very physical. So I think he was afraid this Behçet's disorder was going to affect his ability to continue to utilize his physical body. So some of these things, you can see the losses in each and every one of these things. Now, I talked about a little earlier about taking action, particularly for men. Men, like I said, don't outwardly process grief so much, but they can and often do things, do something, using their talents. One story I heard was a fellow brother died, and he decided to build a pond in his backyard so that every time he would go back and enjoy the pond, he could remember his brother. So this was my activity that I took upon myself to build a memorial website for Noel. It was pretty extensive. It took quite a bit of time to do. And I published this on the internet. It's been taken down since then. But I published it exactly 1 year after his death. So on May 3rd, 2002 is when I put this up. And it had a lot of wonderful stuff. It was very cathartic for me to take this action. So this is another video from that same memorial service for the 19 firefighters that passed away. And again, Vice President Biden is speaking, and he makes a promise to the people and to the families that are there. And I want to share this with you because when he shared it, it really touched my heart because it spoke to me. And what he has to say was true for me. So let's go give this a shot.
I also know from personal experience this moment, as unbelievable as it is, as unbelievable as it is to even fathom it, that the day will come when the memory of your husband, your son, your dad, your brother will bring a smile to your lips before it brings a tear to your eye. My prayer for all of you is that day will come sooner than later, but I promise you, as unbelievable as it is, it will come. It will come. In the words of the hymn we heard at the beginning, My hope for you is that may He lift you up on eagle's wings, bear you on the breath of dawn, and make the sun to shine on you, because it will. It will again. It will again.
This spoke to me because I could relate to the idea that the sun was never going to shine on my life again after Noel died. It took forever, those 2 years. But I've also experienced the flip side of what he's talking about, where so many times a smile will come to my lips before a tear comes to my eye when I think of Noel. That's not to say that tears don't still come. I would say I've processed the grief, but the loss never goes away. How can it go away? It's there. And so every once in a while, that memory of Noel and the loss is just too much, and I'll have a good cry, and then I'm on my way again, living my life, my full life.
May your soul be blessed. May your body rest on the mountain where you were born. May your spirit soar where there's joy evermore. May you find your way in peace. And there's no more harm in your Savior's arms. See you fly away in the sky. Did you hear that call of angels one and all? May you find your way in peace.
Before I finish, I'd also want to share some resources with you, particularly as it relates to suicide and suicide prevention. The numbers are here. There's on the left is the English speaking, in the middle is Spanish speaking, and on the left is LGBTQ prevention numbers. Veterans can dial any of those numbers and simply dial 1, and you'll get connected to a veteran, someone who works specifically with veterans. Also, for anyone who prefers texting to talking to a stranger, you can text TALK to 741741. There are also many other resources that are out there that you can find on your own by searching for grief. Grief recovery, those types of things. There are groups for various types of losses. Here's a few books and a few websites that I wanted to throw at you as well. These are all excellent resources. There are many others. Google search obviously will pull up many others. Find what you need. The one that I've read most of the books on the list, My Son, A Guide to Healing After Death, Loss, or Suicide. Necessary Losses is another good one there. And the other websites are listed here as well. The two at the bottom, Masters in Counseling, and the Center for Grief Recovery and Therapeutic Services. Those links will take you to a list, much longer list of websites. So those are good resources as well. So on your journey of grief, I wish you safe travels. Be gentle with yourself and others as you go. If you're one of those individuals who wants to stay away from grief, it only makes it worse. I think it impacts your relationships, it impacts your spirituality, it impacts your physical health as well. To shove feelings down and to ignore them. Feelings are natural and normal. They're just indications that something is going on. That's all it is, really. They're not right, they're not wrong, they just are. So I hope you remember that as you step into your crucible of grief. Thank you for your attention, and may your journey be gentle.